No. Right, we are at the beginning of chapter 18 in Shmuel Aleph. We have finished the chapter of David and Goliath, which we did in great detail. And I think we got some very good insights into what we're going to see now over the next few chapters is really quite a remarkable insight into the psychology of a sick person. And of course, I'm talking about King Saul, who is very clearly mentally unstable. And we're going to see how that develops. And then it's going to give us all sorts of questions, I think, as to, and I think somebody raised it last time to start with, is, you know, this man was not somebody plucked out of thin air or voted in by the people. This was a man chosen by Kodesh Baruch Hu. And I think that raises all sorts of questions. Currently, I don't have any answers for that, but let's just put it to one side for the moment. And maybe between us, we can come up with something as we go along over the next few weeks. Because what we're going to see is quite a distressing story. Most of them are Forshim, and I think most people who study Tanakh, most Jewish people who learn Tanakh, learn these parashiot from the perspective, largely from the perspective of David HaMelech. And it's true to say, of course, that he is the central character of the coming chapters. But at first, at least, excuse me, at first, at least, I want to concentrate a little bit more on Shaul HaMelech, King Saul, because we'll see what a tragic life he has from this point on. Let's just set the scene. Shaul HaMelech was chosen by God, anointed by Shmuel, apparently reluctant to become king initially, did not live up to expectations. He was reluctant to go out to battle and had to have Yehonatan, his son, do that in the first battle with the Plishtim. If you remember, that was the story that we found, that amazing World War I story with Major Gilbert, who used the Tanakh to find the secret passage up to wherever it was, I can't remember, Michmash, I think it was called. And then he was reluctant, of course, in the David and Goliath battle. As we said many times, it really should have been him, King Saul, that went out to battle Goliath, but he, in a common parlance where I come from, he bottled it. And he had to rely on this ruddy youth, David, to do the work. And this is where we find ourselves now. The end of chapter 17 was the end of that story. Let's just go back to the end of chapter 17 and just see the last couple of psukim.
Bottle, it come from bittle.
Could be, yeah, could be, yeah. Bittel being the Hasidic pronunciation of butel. Bittel, okay. So the end of the chapter here, verse 57, Jeffrey, in chapter 17.
So when David returned from smiting the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, while the head of the Philistine was still in his hand. Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" David replied, "The son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite."
So that was where we ended last time, when we spoke about the seeming problem here, that of course Saul knew very well who he was, because he'd been playing harp for him until now. But we decided that possibly the answer was that he was asking not specifically who are you, but what is your lineage? What gave you the ability and the siyata dishmaya, the help from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? In what merit did you get that? In other words, what's your lineage? How come you've got such good genes? And that's where we ended. So let's go now and begin chapter 18. Let's start reading and we'll see where we go. Off you go, Jeffrey.
It was after David finished speaking to Saul that Jonathan's soul became attached to David's soul, and Jonathan loved him as himself.
Okay, are you reading from Art Scroll?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, so that is pretty similar to what we've got on the screen, actually. Oh, I haven't shared the screen with you, have I? Sorry. Let's do that now. There you go. We should have it now. So, Vayehi kechalato ledaber el Shaul, and it was as he finished speaking to Saul, i.e., presumably the end of the last chapter, the discussion about his lineage. And at that point, let's have a look at the expressions. V'nefesh Yehonatan nikshara v'nefesh David. The soul of Jonathan became nikshara, which is a passive form, became what? Kesher. What is a kesher?
Tying together, not.
A knot or a bond, that's right. It became tied together with the soul of David. And I just want to stop there for a minute and we'll come back to the end of the pasuk in a minute. Where in the last few weeks have you heard that expression of a soul being bound up with another soul? Let's say, how many weeks ago in the laning? Count yesterday as 1 week. 1, 2, 3 weeks ago. No, 4 weeks ago. So 3 weeks and a day ago. Should be enough clues. Anyone? David?
Nafsho kshura b'nafsho.
Exactly. Nafsho kshura b'nafsho, which is in the beginning of Parshat Vayigash. Beginning of Parshat Vayigash. Yehuda draws near to Yosef. At this point, the brothers do not know that Yosef is Yosef. Binyamin has been accused of thieving the goblet. Yosef has said, right, you lot go home. Benjamin will stay with me as a slave, as a punishment. And Yehuda steps forward and says, I can't allow that. I can't allow it because I promised my father I would look after him. And if I go back, or we go back to our father without Binyamin, he will die. Why? Because nafsho keshura b'nafsho. Jacob's soul was bound up, tied up with that of Binyamin. And as I said at one of the shiurim that we did over that period of time, that was the point at which Joseph revealed his identity, because what he realized, those 3 words, nafsho kshura b'nafsho, those were the 3 words which were the catalyst and, if you like, the straw that broke Yosef to reveal his identity. Because what he realized was that actually that should have been him. It should have been him whose soul was bound up with his father's soul. And he'd lost 22 years of that. Because nafsho kshura b'nafsho means that the 2 souls were as one. And of course, in the Yosef situation, Yosef had no idea that his father wasn't in on the whole thing. And at that point, he realized that actually he'd misjudged the situation and he had lost 22 years. Nafsho kshura b'nafsho. It's an expression which the Torah uses to demonstrate an absolute and complete connection with one soul and another. It's very interesting here that Jonathan and David are described like that. You all understand that Jacob and Binyamin, or Jacob and Joseph, could be bound up like that. They're flesh and blood. They're father and son. They are children of a favored wife who's passed away in tragic circumstances. It's very understandable that that expression would be, come to you in a second, Ita, it would be very understandable that that expression would be used with a father-son. Very unusual to find friends of that sort of level. You know, the expression blood's thicker than water it's a true expression. At the end of the day, blood is thicker than water. Here we have water, which is described as nefesh nikshara, but nefesh Yehonatan nikshara, but nefesh David. It's an interesting expression, and it shows the depth of connection between Jonathan and David. And we'll carry on with that in a minute. Yes, Anita.
I just wanted to say you have the expression soulmate. So if somebody's your soulmate, you have that kesher with them, even if they're not flesh and blood.
Well, that's true. That is true. A soulmate, that is very true. And that's where the word nefesh comes from. I think I'm more concentrating on the word nikshara, kshura, bound up. You know, it's to the best of my knowledge, maybe David will know different. To the best of my knowledge, the only other place where nefesh kshura b'nafsho is mentioned, that is with Jacob and Joseph. I did try and find another anywhere else, but I didn't find anywhere else. And I think these are the only two places in Tanakh where this expression is used, which is significant, of course. Now, there are all sorts of...
Johnny.
Yes, David.
Is there perhaps another significance why the Navi is using these words, that the two protagonists at the time are Yehuda and Binyamin, and we've got David from Shevet Yehuda and Yonatan from Shevet Binyamin?
Interesting, very interesting. That's interesting. It doesn't 100% fit, does it?
No,
because the two protagonists were actually Joseph and Yehuda in that story, and the two people being talked about were Jacob and Binyamin. But for sure, excuse me, branches here of Klal Yisrael are battling one and another. The connection between Joseph and his father, between Binyamin and his father, is the children of Rachel. Yehuda, of course, was not the firstborn of Leah, but was the chosen one of Leah. Reuven, what's the word? He messed his chance up with the episode with Bilhah. Shimon and Levi were considered too violent, and Yehuda was the one who was singled out on Leah's children to be the leader. So you've got this battle, which of course we'll see as we go along later in history, becomes sadly our history. The battle between the northern kingdom led by Ephraim, the son of Joseph, against the southern kingdom, which is Yehuda and Binyamin, led by Yehuda, who is the child of Leah. So we see this theme of sibling rivalry as it starts off, never ever ends. It stops being sibling rivalry, and at certain points in history it becomes civil war. We had it with Binyamin, didn't we, in the episode of the Pilegesh Begivah, the concubine there, where they nearly wiped out the tribe of Binyamin. We had it earlier on, even still in Sefer Yehoshua, when Reuven and Gad and Chetzi Menashe went back over the Jordan to their children and their animals, and the people were not happy about that because they made a Beit HaMikdash there. There's civil war going on as a result of sibling rivalry. Now, one of the things I wanted to just mention, really in passing at this point, and we can go into it in detail at a later date, and that is the next few words here. Vayehavehu Yehonatan Knafsho. And Jeffrey translated that, and it says on the screen, and Jonathan loved him as himself. Is that what you translated as well, Jeff?
Well, it's what I read.
Jonathan loved him as himself. It's not quite what it says, is it?
That's his soul. It says.
Yeah.
And Steinsaltz says soul.
Yeah, Steinsaltz says exactly what, Johnny? What does the exact...
As Yehonatan loved him as his soul.
As his soul. Now here we have another example and I think it's deliberate. I think it was deliberate in Parashat Vayigash as well. Nafsho kshura benafsho. His soul was bound up with his soul. Who's he and who's he? Who's the subject and who's the object? When Yaakov came down to Egypt and Yosef came out to meet him, the Torah tells us, and he fell on his neck and he wept. And the Mefarshim discuss who's weeping on whose neck, who's the subject, who's the object. And the Torah does that deliberately on a number of occasions to give us this ambiguity, partly so that, 3,500 years later, we can sit around on Zoom and have a discussion about it. But it gives us an opportunity to interpret what's going on here. And the translation on the screen and the art scroll has used the word kenafsho as meaning Jonathan loved him as his own soul. He loved him as much as his own soul. He loved him as himself. Other Mefarshim actually say no. It means he loved him as if his soul, David's soul, was his, which is the same nefesh nikshara benefesh David. But either way, that's just a linguistic thing. Now, there have been attempts, many attempts, to paint the relationship of Jonathan and David as one of a homosexual relationship. And of course, in most recent years, that has gained popularity in certain areas, certain groups of people. And you can make out a good case for it if you wanted to with the language later on. We'll see all sorts of things that may support that theory if you wanted to support it. I would say, however, that this first pasuk is setting us out very clearly what kind of relationship this is. This is a relationship between the souls of Jonathan and David. Okay, I don't think it's relevant whether there was a homosexual relationship or there was not a homosexual relationship. This was a relationship of deep love between two people. Whether it was physical or platonic is not relevant at this point anyway. The Torah, the Tanakh, is telling us that this was not, certainly not purely a physical thing. This was an emotional attachment, the nefesh, Yehonatan Nikshara ben nefesh David, and Jonathan loved him, kenafsho. The Tanakh is stressing the nefesh. What is the nefesh? Nefesh is emotion. Okay, we say every Shabbat, don't we, when we pray for the refuah shalema in public, what do we say? We say they should have a refuat hanefesh or refuat haguf. What does that mean? Refuat hanefesh,
for the soul and body.
Yeah, soul and body. A healing of the soul, meaning those who have emotional, psychological, psychiatric illness should be healed. Refuat haguf, and those who have a physical illness should be healed. So this is very clearly not a physical thing. This is an emotional attachment that Jonathan has to David. The question is, why? Why does Jonathan and David have such a strong relationship? And I think that the next two psukim, or even maybe the next three psukim, may explain that. Let's go on. Verse 2, Jeffrey.
Doesn't say anything about David loving Jonathan at this stage.
No, it doesn't. That is true. That is true. It does not. But we will see in a moment in verse 4 where that is implied. It's a good point, Johnny. Let's just come back to that when we get to verse 4. Jeffrey, verse 2.
Saul conscripted him that day and did not permit him to return to his father's home.
Stop there, please. Now, if you just had that pasuk, and let's look at the Hebrew to give us a little bit of a more literal context. Vayikachehu Shaul. What does that mean? Literal translation. Vayikach. What does that mean?
And he took.
and he took, correct. Vayikachehu Shaul. Shaul took him. What does that imply to you?
He might have been jealous of Jonathan.
He is clearly later on, but I think you're looking at that with the benefit of knowing what comes on afterwards. Just that pasuk, Shaul took him on that day. What does that imply to you? Anyone? Jeffrey?
Well, we knew that he was just a youth. He wasn't in the army. He'd come along, he killed Goliath, and so Shaul conscripted him.
Okay, so you've looked at the Art Scroll translation and said, yeah, he's conscripted him, and I think that's right. He's conscripted him because he's done well with Goliath, and in fact he did. He put him in charge of the army. Now let's just see, to help you see the point that I'm trying to get across here. You've translated, or you've read out the Art Scroll translation as conscripted. What's a conscript, Jeffrey?
Hey, someone that's forced into going into the army. He didn't really want to.
Exactly. That's the point I'm trying to get over. Vayikachehu Shaul, and he took him on that day, implies, and that's why the Art Scroll has, in my view, accurately, not literally, but accurately translated, conscripted. He took David against his will to be in the army. And then the Navi tells us, in case you were under any illusions as to this, the end part of the pasuk says, "V'lo natano lashuv beit aviv." He did not allow him to return to his father's house. What does that imply to you? Definitely against his will. He wasn't allowed. He's been conscripted. This is Shaul, the king, saying to David, right, young man, you are now head of the army, whatever the role it is that I'm going to give you, and that's it, mate. You're in for the duration. You're not even allowed any leave. Jeffrey and Marcel and I have a mutual grandfather who was conscripted into an army, and he went home on leave for Pesach, and he did a vayivrach. He ran away. He ran away because it was very hard to be a Jew in the Romanian army. And if he hadn't run away, probably the three of us would not be here today. So, yeah, David HaMelech was conscripted into the army, and he was not allowed to return to his father's house. Why wasn't he allowed to return to his father's house? Because Shaul was afraid that he'd do a runner. And so he would not allow it. This is Shaul has exerted his position as the king and has conscripted David into this position. Now, that doesn't follow from verse 1, does it? No, the two things seem to be, as you would say, non sequiturs. They don't follow. But look at verse 3, Jeffrey, please.
Jonathan and David sealed a covenant, since each loved the other like himself.
Okay, let's stop there. And there's your answer, Johnny, to your question. They made a brit, but ahavato oto kanafsho. It's not, your translation, Jeffrey, is not accurate. Say it again, please.
Jonathan and David sealed a covenant, since each loved the other like himself.
Is that what it says in the Hebrew, everybody? Vayichrot Yehonatan v'David Brit. Fair enough. Jonathan and David cut a covenant. Fine so far. But ahavato oto kenafsho. Again, can you see what's happened here? It's ambiguous.
And to the singular.
It's in the singular. Correct, Johnny. It's in the singular. But ahavato, with his love, oto, him, kenafsho, like his soul. Now, the Art Scroll translation has said Well, it's deliberately in the singular because they're like one soul, because they are bound up with one another. But there is room, if you wanted to say that this is a little bit more one-sided. And Vayichrot Yehonatan v'David Brit, Ba'ahavato oto kanafsho. And look at the translation on the screen, because he loved him as himself. If you read that sentence the way they've described it, they've translated it on the screen, it's Jonathan that's doing, making all the running here. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he, brackets Jonathan, loved him, brackets David, as himself. So the translation on the screen indicates that it's not as two-sided at this point, and your question still remains a little bit, Johnny, but the first half of the pasuk does give us some of the answer. Now, that wasn't what I wanted to point out. Yes, Marcel.
Just a famous sentence in Hebrew, Ohev orecha kamocha, how does that fit in with it?
Okay. Ve'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha, and you shall love your neighbor, your friend, like yourself. There are volumes written on that as to how you love somebody like yourself. What happens if you don't love yourself very much, if you're not particularly good self-esteem? Well, you shouldn't be loving somebody like that. There are volumes written on that, and it's a very difficult thing, of course. Take it at its simple level. It's what Hillel said, right? Hillel took ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha in its most basic form, and he said, remember the famous story of the person who wanted to convert, came to Shammai and said, teach me the whole Torah while I'm stood on one leg. And what did Shammai say?
Love your neighbour as yourself.
No, Shammai said, bugger off.
The Hillel said that. No.
And then he came to Hillel.
Hillel said it.
And Hillel said, no, he didn't say love your neighbour like yourself. He said,
do unto others.
Not quite. The other way. He said, you're almost there, Johnny. He said, that which is hateful to others, that which is hateful to you, don't do to others.
Yeah.
Not quite the same as what you said, but so Hillel explained the pasuk of Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha at its most basic level, meaning it's not really possible to love another person like yourself, except possibly for your children and grandchildren. But what you can do with others who are not that in that relationship is you can, says Hillel, you can say to yourself, I would not like that done to me, so I'm not going to do it to somebody else. And that's a good start. And remember, this was a ger, a prospective convert who wanted to know what Judaism was all about. Hillel said, that which is hateful to you, do not do to other people. The rest is commentary. That is the entire Torah on one leg. The rest is commentary. Now go and learn. That is what Hillel said. And it remains the most brilliant exposition and definition of Judaism that there is to this day. That which is hateful to others, don't. That which is hateful to you, do not do to other people. If you start with that premise, then you will not go far wrong. Everything else is commentary, says Hillel. In other words, what Hillel is saying is, and that's why Rabbi Akiva said it, Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is a great klal, a rule in the Torah. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. It is the rule in the Torah. What is the Torah all about? Does God really care whether we tear toilet paper on the perforations? Does he really care if we've got an estrog that's the size of a football? No, of course. Well, nicely. And that we do the right things, and that we have morals, and that we have ethics, and that we do my favorite pasuk in the whole Torah, and you shall do that which is good and upright in the eyes of Hashem. So the whole Rabbi Akiva's Zeh klal gadol b'Torah, this is a major rule in the Torah. Love your neighbor like yourself. Hillel says, let's start, he says to this prospective convert, let's start from the basics. That which is hateful to you, don't do to others. And now we'll go and we'll teach you the finer points and how to achieve that, which is what the Torah is all about. How did we get onto that? Because we were asking whether this was a mutual relationship between David and Jonathan. I think it was a mutual relationship, but I personally get the distinct impression that at this point in the story, Jonathan's making all the running. Okay, now I asked you if verse 2 followed on from verse 1, and you all agreed that it didn't. However, if I ask you, does verse 3 follow on from verse 2, what will you say? Saul took him on that day and did not allow him to return to his father's house. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Another non sequitur. It doesn't follow. However, if I ask you, does verse 3 follow on from verse 1, you might get a different answer. Jeffrey, read out verse 1 and 3. Miss out 2.
It was after David finished speaking to Saul that Jonathan's soul became attached to David's soul, and Jonathan loved him as himself. Jonathan and David sealed a covenant, since each loved the other like himself.
I think you'll agree that that follows on beautifully.
Yeah.
So we have a question, don't we? Our question is, what's verse 2 doing in the middle of that verse 1 and 3? Because it doesn't follow, it doesn't make sense, it's disjointed. Okay, I'm going to make the question even stronger as we go on, but that's the premise of my question at the moment. Let's go on to verse 4, which I think does follow on from verse 3. So verse 4, Dave. Jeffrey, do 3 and then 4.
Jonathan and David sealed a covenant, since each loved the other like himself. And Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David. Also his battle garments, down to his sword, his bow, and his belt.
Okay, let's stop there. Okay, what has Jonathan done here?
I think he's promoted him because Jonathan was the king's son. He's promoted. He's done the promotion, really. Because he's the king's son, the king will make sure he's got the finest weapons, and he has given them to David.
Yes, and not only the finest weapons, Jeffrey, what else has he given him?
He's given him his coat.
Exactly. Now, what do we know about coats in the Torah?
They're a mark of authority, aren't they?
They are a mark of authority. Give me some examples of where.
Well, the coat of many colors.
A coat of many colors. What else?
David cut Saul's coat when he was sleeping.
Okay, okay, that's a bit later on. Yes, we've got before that. You mentioned the coat of many colors. Same person, Joseph. What was he given when he became
He was given Pharaoh's robes.
He was given a royal garment.
Yeah.
What did we talk about last time, if you remember? We talked about the English expression to take over the mantle. And what was the mantle? What is a mantle?
It's a garment.
A coat. It's a garment. It's a coat of position. Today we have it in England, at least, don't we? What does the mayor wear? A chain of office. Chain of office, and that's the equivalent. What does excuse me? What does the Lords wear in the House of Lords?
Coats, the cloaks.
They wear special cloaks of ermine and all sorts of stuff, right? What do the judges wear? High Court judges. They wear special red robes. The robe is the sign of authority. It's a sign of being being on top, of being leadership. Jonathan, who was, of course, first in line to the throne, strips himself of his cloak and gives it to David. What is Jonathan saying by doing that.
He's abdicating.
He's saying, it's you, David, are more fitting than I to be the next king. Okay, it's very important, this. This is really important. Jonathan strips himself of the cloak that was on him and he gives it to David, and his garments and his sword and his bow and even his belt. Even his belt. Now, what's the belt in the Torah? Where do we see that somebody gives somebody else their cloak, their sword, well, not their sword, their stick, and their belt?
Oh, Yehuda.
Yehuda, yeah.
Yehuda. And
And
what?
then,
Yehuda to Tamar, yes? Yehuda, when he had the episode with Tamar, he gave his cloak, his belt, and his staff to Tamar. And what did that indicate? What was it for?
Pidyon.
The debt. It was security.
It was a surety. And how was it a surety, Jeffrey?
Well, because he thought that he was paying for a service.
He did. But how was it a surety? Because he could be identified by those things, right? That was the whole point. He could be identified by those things. And in the end, of course, he was identified by those things. And then, of course, he had to admit that he was the one that had impregnated her. So this was not just a giving of somebody, you know, when you're teenagers, you swapped love items with your beloved, you know, you might give them a ring or whatever. Yeah, Anita's looking at Michael. Yeah, what did Michael give you when you were a teenager, Anita? Some token of his affection and love. Oh, you're not telling. Okay. Anyway, this is not just that. This is something Jonathan is giving his entire identity to David. He is lock, stock, and barrel handing over his airship. Is that a word, Michael? Airship? No, it doesn't sound like it's a word. No, I don't mean the airship in the ground. I mean, you know, being an heir to the throne. He's giving over that position of being heir to the throne to David. Lock, stock, and barrel. The cloak, which is the cloak of office, the garments, the sword, and even his belt. The belt is the most fundamental, because that's the one that identifies you the most, even to his girdle, va'ad chagoro, until his belt. Okay, now, verse 5.
David went forth, and when whatever Saul would send him to do, he would be successful. Saul appointed him over the warriors, and it was good in the eyes of all the people, and also in the eyes of Saul's servants.
Okay, now, does that follow on from verses 3 and 4? No, it does not. Does it follow on from verse 2? Read verses 2 and 5, Jeffrey.
Saul conscripted him that day and did not permit him to return to his father's home. David went forth, and in whatever Saul would send him to do, he would be successful. Saul appointed him over the warriors, and it was good in the eyes of all the people, and also in the eyes of Saul's servants.
That follows on beautifully, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Again, that solidifies our question. What is going on here? We've got two parallel stories going on here. We've got the story of Jonathan and Saul's relationship, verses 1, 3, 4. And then at the same time, mixed in, we've got verses 2, 5, and 6, which we'll come to in a sec, which is the story of Saul and Jonathan's relationship. So they're all mixed up here, and it's difficult to see what the pattern is here. But if you look at it that way, And you can see there are two distinct tracks. And what the Navi is trying to do here is to give us a contrast of the relationship between Jonathan and David on the one hand, which is a relationship of complete love, complete loyalty, and a mutuality, and with no ulterior motive whatsoever on behalf of Jonathan. On the contrary, Jonathan is, if you like, doing things for David to his own detriment. Compare that with Saul, who we will see as the verses 2, 5, and 6 progress. This is a very different relationship between Saul and David, where Saul is already from this very early stage beginning to be jealous of David. Now, something very, very subtle. Verse 5 that Jeffrey just read, the end of it says, Vayitav be'enei kol ha'am, and it was good in the eyes of all the people. V'gam be'enei avdei Shaul, and also in the eyes of the servants of Shaul. And what was pleasing? Obviously, what went on before, which was that David was successful in everything that he did. Whose eyes are not specifically mentioned there?
Shaul's.
Shaul's. And that is not a mistake. That is deliberate, because it was good in the eyes of the people, and it was good in the eyes of the servants of the king. Doesn't say it was good in the eyes of the king. Why not?
Because the king had other thoughts, didn't he? I mean,
yes, we see right from here he did.
And also, the king realized he wasn't up to fighting Goliath, but he had promoted his son in the army with the coat and with the weapons and so on and so forth. The son saw that David deserved those, befriended him, he liked him, and so on and so forth. And this also, all in my opinion, it made Saul feel even more inferior than he was.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why Tanakh is telling us here. That's why they've mixed up these two stories to tell us that this relationship between Saul and David, is a very different relationship to the one that we've got in parallel of Jonathan and David. Jonathan and David offer mutual benefit for one another. Saul, even at this very early stage, is jealous of David. He's got bad thoughts about David. Let's carry on.
And Pasuk 5, excuse me, Johnny, Pasuk 5, it said, everything David did, Saul was pleased about it. And then Saul appointed him as an officer. I mean, he only did that.
Where does it say Saul was pleased about it?
David went forth primarily on military missions, and everything that Saul would send him, he would succeed.
Okay, that doesn't mean he was pleased about it.
No, but then Saul appointed him as an officer over all the men of war. So
because he knew he was good at his job.
Yeah, okay.
Have you ever had?
That's where it's mentioned.
Have you ever had in your business a member of staff who was very good at their job who you didn't like? Because I have.
No, to be honest.
Okay, well I have.
Don't think
I had a practice manager who was excellent at her job, but she was horrible. But it doesn't mean that she wasn't good at her job. And I appointed her to be the practice manager. She was very good at her job, but she wasn't nice, and I didn't like her. David, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, Radak makes a lovely comparison between the language of the verse that you've just read and a pasuk from this coming week's parasha. Gam ha'ish Moshe gadol ma'od be'eretz Mitzrayim be'einei avdei Faro uve'einei ha'am. So in Pharaoh's servants' eyes and in the people's eyes, but not in Paro's eyes.
Exactly the same point. Interesting, very interesting. I hadn't seen that. That's great. So there's a contemporaneous proof from this week's parsha. So Shaul here, he's not pleased. He's pointed him as the appointed him over the soldiers because he knows he's good. Don't mean he's happy about it, but it was pleasing in the eyes of all the people and in the eyes of the Saul's servants, and that's going to wind him up even more, because his servants are going to be going around saying, "Oh, King Shaul, you made a great appointment there. This David guy, he's a top guy. Look what he's done. He's done this, he's done that, he's done the other. We're really pleased with your appointment." And of course, we know that Shaul is, well, we do know now because we know it, we've read ahead, but we know that Shaul is on the brink of a paranoid psychosis here. And this is just going to feed his psychosis even more. And we'll see in the next couple of psukim that it is exactly what happens. Now, verse 6, please.
I just make one other point that Rabbi Bazak makes in the significance of Jonathan taking off his garments and putting them on David. Rabbi Bazak makes the comparison between what we've just the previous story, where David refuses to wear Shaul's garments. He puts them on and for whatever reason takes them off again, and this obviously was significant and something that was going to anger Shaul even more.
Yes, I read that in Rabbi Bazak's thing, and I meant to bring that out, and thank you for reminding me on that. I think it's important. What David's referring to, of course, is when David was going to battle Goliath, Shaul gave him his armor, remember? And Rashi there says that the armor shrank miraculously to fit David, who was a much smaller person than Shaul. And David took it off. So he didn't take it off because it didn't fit. He took it off because he didn't want it. He didn't want to demonstrate that he wanted Shaul's position. Now, if you are paranoid, as Shaul was, and your fellow rejects your armor, and then you see that he accepts the armor of somebody else, i.e. your son, Jonathan, then that's going to make you even more angry. And it is a contrast there that we don't see that David rejects the clothing of Jonathan, and it is a contrast to what he did with Shaul's armor in the previous chapter. Thank you for reminding me on that, David. Right, verse 6.
It happened that when the troops came back, when David returned from slaying the Philistine, that the women from all the towns of Israel came out to sing with timbrels to greet King Saul, with drums, with gladness, and with cymbals.
Okay. Does anybody know what a timbrel is?
Triangle.
A what?
It's
A triangle.
No, that's the that's a shalishim.
Oh, shalishim.
It's a piece of parchment in a circle and you tap it.
Drum.
Tambourine. Like
A tambourine.
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 Okay, what's the difference between a tambourine and a timbrel?
I don't know. I think it's the same thing.
Just a different word for the same thing.
I don't know.
Neither do I.
One's got bells on.
One's got bells on. Okay, I don't know. Somebody can take the homework of finding out for next week what is the difference between a timbrel and a tambourine. When was the last time any of you used the word timbrel in everyday language? Never.
I think a timbrel hasn't got the parchments in the middle. It's just a circle with the bells, and the other one has parchment, like a drum as well.
Okay, all right. That's interesting. All right. Stuart says that a timbrel is one of those shaky things that the backing singers of pop singers have, and they sit in the back and they just shake these little things around. That's a timbrel, according to Stuart. Right, well, you can confirm that for us with some pictures next week, Stuart. Anyway, Why am I asking you that? Because the Hebrew word is mecholot, okay? And my translation, I didn't write it. The translation on the screen, the Chabad website translation, says all the women came out of all the cities of Israel to sing and with musical instruments, brackets, in their hands. So mecholot, they don't know what it is either. Chabad doesn't know the difference between a timbrel and tambourine either. So they've hedged their bets and called it a musical instrument, which is fine. Now, when did you...
Rabbi Steinsaltz calls it a drum.
A drum, okay. And I think that as far as I am aware, the root of the word timbrel and tambourine, which is the same root, it does imply some kind of drum, which is why I'll be interested to know if Stuart is right, that a timbrel is not a drum because it doesn't have any parchment in it. But we will see in due course. Well, yes,
I think I give in.
You give in, okay. Okay, I don't know. Anyway, I'm more interested in the Hebrew word than the English word. When have you seen that word before?
Oh, yeah. When they walked round the walls of Jericho, and they made a noise.
They did, but that was with shofars, wasn't it?
Well, but
I'm interested in this word mecholot, or its root.
Oh, when they crossed the Red Sea and they sang Shir Shirim.
Ah, okay. Who took?
That's the ladies, the women.
Ladies, thank you.
Miriam with the ladies.
Yes, here it is on the screen for you. It is in 2 weeks' time, Parashat Beshalach, chapter 15. There it is on the screen, Jeffrey.
And Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand. And all the women came out after her with timbrels and with dances.
Now, interestingly, look at the Hebrew. Vaitikach Miriam Hanaviyah, and Miriam, the prophetess, sister of Aaron, took et hatof biyada. Tof. They translate tof as a timbrel. But and all the women came in after her, betufim uvim cholot, with timbrels and with dances. Okay, so this translation has translated a different word as timbrel, and our word mecholot as dancing. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because we have translated mecholot as timbrels. Jeffrey's correctly identified the Shirat Miriam, the Song of Miriam, as including the word mecholot, and the translation here is all mixed up. We've got a different translation for timbrels and all sorts here. But you're quite right. Well remembered, Jeffrey. Now, you have seen that word, though, much more recently than this pasuk that you have correctly identified, Jeffrey. You have all, I am absolutely certain that you have all seen and said this word much more recently. Anyone? I would say you have even said this word in the last few hours. You give in?
It's a chemla.
Chemla, no. Chemla means it means mercy.
Mercy, yeah.
Okay, here it is on the screen for you. You'll kick yourselves when you see it.
Psalm 150.
There you go, David. Psalm 150. Recognize that? Hallelujah, hallelujah, b'kadasho, hallelujah, b'rikiozo, hallelujah, b'gverato, hallelujah, karov gudlo, hallelujah, b'teke shofar, hallelujah, b'nevel v'chinor, hallelujah, b'tov u'machol. There it is.
Yeah.
And it ends off with kol neshama tahallel, hallelujah. Yes, you've said that this morning, Johnny?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. we say it just before Shirat Hayam, don't we?
Yeah.
It's part of Psuke to Zimra. Part of Psuke to Zimra. So I was right. You have all said it, I'm sure, in the last few hours. There it is. And this is, look how we have it here. Praising with timbre. This is another word, which we've not, a slightly different word. Timbres, not timbrels. I don't know if that's a typo or what. Then maybe there's another instrument called a timbra. Anyway, and here it's dance. Anyway, the point is that machol means either dancing or it means a musical instrument. Now, what's all this one I got ready here? What's this in Shoftim? Yes, here's another one I wanted to show you. Look at this one. Anybody remember this? Yiftach, our old friend Yiftach. What did Yiftach do? Stupid man. Who remembers what Yiftach did?
He offered his
He
daughter.
made an oath that
Offered his
whoever
daughter.
came out of the house first, he would
Yeah.
sacrifice.
That's right. And what happened? Verse 34 on the screen, Jeffrey.
And Yiftach came to Mitzvah to his house, and behold, his daughter was coming out towards him with timbrels and with dances, and she was an only child. He had from her neither a son nor a daughter.
There it is. Betufim, uvim cholot. Same words. Okay. I just wanted to show you that because it's nice to see a word in Tanakh that we're familiar with, or at least we should be familiar with, in context. So let's go back to our chapter. So they came out. The women came out of all the cities of Israel to sing with musical instruments in their hands. Why do you think it's got that in brackets? I don't think you read out in their hands, Jeffrey, did you?
I don't think it said it here.
No, I don't think it doesn't say it in the Hebrew either. I wonder, I don't know, I'm guessing now that the Chabad translation has put in their hands because of Shirat Miriam. Because Shirat Miriam, which I put on the screen for you here now, does say that she took the tof, the drum, biyada, in her hands. And I just wonder whether the translator here has put in brackets in their hands just to give us a little bit more of a push towards Miriam and the idea of the Shirat Hayam. Be that as it may, interesting concept, no? That David returns from slaying the Philistine, and what happens is all the women come out of all the cities of Israel to sing with musical instruments in their hands. Why?
But it was a great victory, and the men were returning.
Yes, exactly. And what does that remind you of?
The D-Day.
There we go. Let's have a look at this. VE Day. Have a look at the screen. Where is it? Not coming up. I've got it all ready for you as well. There it is. See that?
Yeah.
Factory workers in Manchester on VE Day. Look at all those women coming out. What are they doing? They're dancing. They're dancing for victory. That's what you do. That was VE Day. And this was VP Day, victory against the Plishtim. Remember that the battle had been to see who was going to be slaves to who. If David had lost, these lot were all going to be slaves. And actually, the women would not have been slaves. What would they have been? They'd have been raped and concubines and all sorts. Yeah. So it's quite right that they should be dancing. And there's another one. That's Churchill addressing the nation on VE Day. You can see all these people coming out to celebrate VE Day. It struck me when I read this idea that the women came out singing and dancing, that this is what it must have been like on VE Day. I'm not old enough to have been born on VE Day. Anybody remember VE Day? Jeff, Marcella, you would have been a little boy, I guess.
Yes, we went to Piccadilly Gardens to see the American plane there.
You were how old? About 4, 5?
5 maybe. 5, yeah.
Yeah. So you know that's what it must have been.
Stuart, you remember Stuart?
Stuart, you remember VE Day? No, Stuart's only a youngster. Anyway, it just struck me that was something interesting to show you, to get an idea of what this must have been like. Now, the reason I've done that, we're out of time, but the reason that I've done that is we just want Jeffrey to read verses 7, 8, and 9. We will make no comment on them now because we've run out of time, but we will start next week with discussing verses 6, 7, 8, and 9. So if you could just read 7, 8, and 9 for us, Jeffrey.
The rejoicing women called out and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Saul grew very angry, and this matter was disturbing in his eyes. He said, they have attributed to David 10,000, while to me they have attributed thousands. He is lacking only the kingship. And Saul eyed David with suspicion from that day on.
Okay, I mean, does that not give you Jeffrey just read it beautifully there. It gives me shivers down the spine the way you read that, Jeffrey. It was brilliant. And yeah, that's amazing, no? This is telling you very clearly Saul's state of mind here. We're not going to go into this now. I'm going to leave that with you. And that is where we will stop for a cliffhanger finish. And we'll see what happens next week. Yes, Jeffrey?
I was just going to say it's a continuing state of mind and possibly worsening.
Yes, we'll see, won't we? Later on, it does get worse. But the Pasuk tells us very clearly, and we'll go into the word here in some detail next week, that Shaul, as you read out, eyed David with suspicion. On the screen, I've taken it off now, but it says, and Saul eyed David. It doesn't say with suspicion. We'll look at the Hebrew word next time, and we'll look at it in some detail. But we've set the scene very nicely today for the relationship between Saul and David. Yes, Michael? Michael Leaf, you've frozen on us. Yes, Michael?
I was just wondering what the timescale was in what you just read out. The women came from all the cities of Israel. I mean, how long did that take, and how did they get the news that led them to do that? I mean, it's not just a quick thing, is it?
Okay, I think that we can go back to the photograph that I showed you, because that was in Manchester. Okay, not everybody from the whole country on VE Day went down to London to Trafalgar Square, right? They would have had their own street parties. So I think that they came out of all of the cities of Israel to sing and with musical instruments. So that wherever they were, they came in and they were singing and in their own areas. You're absolutely right. It could not have been a coordinated thing. Maybe a few months later, they had some kind of victory parade like they did in, after the war. But this was a spontaneous outbreak of gratitude and of praise for both Saul and David, but obviously more for David than for Saul, which is why Saul gets his knickers in a twist about it. So I think, yeah, they came out of all their cities. Not necessarily did they go to the capital city. Where was Saul's capital city?
Hebron.
Anyone remember? No, not Hebron. That was David's capital city when he was king of Judah.
Sheila, was it?
Giv'ah.
Egypt.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Any other comments, questions before we go?
Just the Oxford Dictionary's the concise Oxford Dictionary says a timbrel is a musical percussion instrument, one being able to be held up in the hand like a tambourine.
Like a tambourine. But it doesn't say that it is a tambourine, just like a tambourine.
Like a tambourine.
Right? Stuart, you're done. You're finished, Stuart.
I know, I looked it up. It's a drum, and a tambourine has the bells.
Ah, okay. So a timbrel is
Is
a
a
tambourine
drum.
without the bells.
Right.
I also noticed that in Manchester on VE Day they didn't come out with any instruments. They just came out dancing and happy.
They came out
There was no
dancing.
instruments.
That's interesting. Maybe they didn't have any there. We were very poor in Manchester in
Ah, okay.
1945. Couldn't afford any drums. Couldn't afford any drums.
Very black in Manchester, they were white. Very parady in Manchester.
Yeah. Only women, you noticed. Only women in that picture that I
Yeah.
showed you. Very frum in
Maybe
Manchester.
they had to carry umbrellas instead in Manchester.
Yeah. Okay.
Rabbi Steinsaltz shows a picture of the orchestra and choir of women and children in Nineveh. A picture
Yes,
at the bottom.
I can see it. Yes, I can see that picture. Yes. And they're playing a harp, if you can see.
A harp, yes.
Yeah, it's not a timbrel. That's definitely not a
no
timbrel.
timbrels inside.
No. Very good. Okay. Shavua Tov, everyone. Tomorrow night, we will resume the Tefillah Shior. We have made rapid progress and we have finished the bracha of Chasadim Tovim L'Amo Yisrael, and we will move on to the next bit, which is whether or not we say Akedat Yitzchak before davening, before Psukei de Zimra. So that's tomorrow night, 8 o'clock in Shul and on Zoom and on recording. Wednesday Gemara, etc. Shavua Tov, everyone.
Shavua Tov, thank you.
Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov.
Yes, Chodesh Tov. Yes, Chodesh Tov.